You know how we all kind of code switch, right? You talk to your boss one way and your best friend a totally different way. But what if the stakes were way higher than just being a little awkward? Imagine a world with a language that only existed inside the gilded cage of a royal palace. Well, that's what we're going to explore, this lost language of power. It sounds like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? But the answer is, well, it's anything but. See, in the royal court of Korea's Joseon dynasty, just being polite wasn't nearly enough. No, you had to speak an entirely different language. Take a super simple word like meal. In Korean, that's pop. Any regular person would eat pop, but the king? Oh no, he ate sura. And this wasn't just some fancy synonym. It was a completely separate word from a separate vocabulary, like a linguistic wall separating royalty from, well, everyone else. And look, we're not just talking about a handful of unique words here. This was a complete linguistic system, an entire world built and held together by language, all hidden away behind palace walls. It's called Gangjung-Iano, which literally means Korean court language. And technically, it's what linguists call a sociolect, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's a language spoken by a very specific social group. In this case, that group was the palace community, a totally closed-off world with its own rules, its own culture, and of course, its own way of speaking. So what was it that made this language so different? Well, it all boils down to the vocabulary, which was very, very carefully designed to do three specific things, all centered around power. First up, and this is the big one, the language was built to elevate the king. Every single word spoken around him was a constant reminder of his absolute, almost godlike authority. And the main way they did this was just fascinating. They took the mystical dragon, the ultimate symbol of divinity and imperial power, and they linguistically attached it to everything connected to the king. So his face wasn't just a face, it was the dragon face. His official clothes, they were the dragon robes. And if you want to know just how deep this went, get this. Even something as profoundly human as crying was completely transformed. The king didn't just cry, he shed dragon tears. This language literally turned a man into a living myth. Okay, so the second feature of this language was its unbelievable precision. The palace was a world of high ceremony and refinement, you know? And the vocabulary absolutely reflected that obsession with detail. I mean, just look at this chart. This is not for a butcher shop. These are the court's specific names for different cuts of beef. A commoner might just say beef, but a court attendant had to know the difference between suksal, meat from the mouth, and gunyongsal, meat from the rump. This was never just about food. It was about showing you belonged, that you had this sophisticated knowledge. And the third feature? Pure taboo. So many ordinary, everyday words were seen as too coarse, too common for the palace. They were basically forbidden and got replaced with more formal, often Chinese-based terms. This created the super exclusive in-group. For instance, inside the palace, you didn't have an I or none, you had anjong. The common word for mouth, ipe, was off limits. You had to say gusin. Even your ear, or gui, became ibu. Seriously, to speak inside the palace, you had to learn a whole new anatomy, a new reality that was defined entirely by these specific words. But, okay, even if you memorized all the right words, that was only half the battle. The grammar itself was literally a map of the social hierarchy. Your rank decided the very structure of every sentence you spoke. This system, called hwage, or speech levels, was unbelievably complex. So if you were a minister talking to the king, you'd use the extreme honorific level. But the queen, talking to her husband the king, used a slightly different high honorific. And the king himself, he would constantly shift his own speech. He'd use a familiar honorific with his ministers, but then switch to the plain level with his own kids. Every single conversation was this delicate dance of status. So what happened to this incredibly intricate language? Well, like so many things that are tied to absolute power, its fate was basically sealed by history. But first, it's really important to know that this kind of thing isn't totally unique to Korea. Lots of monarchies developed their own special languages. European kings used the famous royal we, speaking about themselves in the plural. And Japan and Thailand have their own super sophisticated systems of royal language that are actually still used today. Creating that linguistic distance is a classic tool of power. For Korea's court language, though, the end was directly tied to the monarchy's own power. It first got weakened back in the Goryeo dynasty, when Mongol influence actually forced the king to downgrade his own titles. Then it hit its peak of complexity during the Joseon dynasty, only to completely die out in the early 20th century when the monarchy collapsed. Without the palace's language simply had nowhere to live. So yeah, the language is gone. It's a relic, a piece of history. But the idea behind it? Oh, that is very, very much alive. Because let's be real, we still use language to create in-groups and out-groups all the time. We use specialized words to show we're an expert or that we're part of a certain community, and to signal our status. The basic principle of 공정이야노, using language as both a barrier and a badge, never really went away. Which kind of leaves us with one last question to think about. What are the court languages of today? I mean, think about the completely impenetrable jargon you hear in corporate boardrooms, or the complex, ever-changing slang of online communities, or the dense terminology in academic fields. Aren't those, in their own way, the court languages of our time? They're linguistic walls that still define who's in, who's out, and who holds the power.